In this video we're going to take a close-up look at the Skywatcher Heritage Virtuoso 90 and 114 auto tracking telescopes. Regular viewers may remember we gave you a brief glimpse of the Virtuoso when it was first displayed at European Astrofest in 2012. In this video we're going to treat it in a bit more detail. This 90mm Mac, obviously we've seen this with lots of other mountings. This has been a star performer for Skywatcher for a very long time, and it's a tried and tested instrument. We've got a 1250 focal length instrument here, so don't be fooled by this apparent diminutive size of the tube. Inside this optical tube we've got an optical folding arrangement where we've got a secondary at the front end, we've got a perforated primary mirror at the back here, and there's a backwards and forwards of the light goes down through the tube, through the corrector at the front here, off the primary, back up to the secondary, back down the tube, through the hole in the mirror in the primary, and then onto the 45-degree mirror here and out through the eyepiece. Now that's actually a very long telescope mounted on this very small mounting. You've got a full 1250mm of focal length there. Now that really makes this an absolutely great little telescope for looking at the moon and the planets and that kind of stuff. Now you probably, again, if you follow the channel, you probably know my opinion on this. If a first telescope's going to be a great telescope, it's going to have to give you good views of the moon and planets. The Virtuoso 90 definitely does that. Another nice thing I like about the 90 is the way that it actually attaches on here onto the Virtuoso with this dovetail bar. Makes it very easy for taking the telescope apart, putting other equipment on here, whatever we might do. Makes it very solid. And again, it's nice that there's a kind of an upgrade path there. You can put other things on the mounting and not just the telescope. We're going to come to that a little bit later on in a bit more detail. It's equipped with a trusty red dot finder here, which makes lining up the telescope initially very easily. Comes with two eyepieces. We get a 25mm eyepiece and a 10mm eyepiece, and you can see that fits into the 1.25" star diagonal that's fitted here as well. The star diagonal makes sure you don't get a crick in the neck when you're looking at targets overhead, makes the telescope very comfortable to use. Nice little feature as well on the eyepiece holder on the rear cell of the Virtuoso. If I take that off, we've actually got a thread on here that enables you to put a T-mount so that you can fit an SLR camera directly onto here. Now the Virtuoso allows you to do that really quite beautifully because of the amount of inward focuser motion, so you can easily get a target in focus on the film plane of the camera very easily. The 114 has got exactly the same thread mounted on the focuser. Not so easy though to work with an SLR camera. You will typically need a special adapter to enable that to work, typically a photovisual Barlow lens with its own thread on it, so just bear that in mind. Photographically the Virtuoso works very well. The 114 not so good, not when used with SLR cameras anyway. Let's home in now on the star of the show, and that's the Virtuoso auto tracking mount itself. Now remember, this is the part of the telescope that's the same for both the 90 and the 114. Just taking a general look at it, straight away we can see that this tough fibre board has been used again in its construction, and it really is a very solidly constructed little mount. When we first saw a fibre board like this being used on the 130 Heritage and the 76 Heritage, I think I viewed it with some scepticism. I think the little boy in me didn't really want telescopes made out of hardboard. That didn't sound like a good idea, but I think it's a prejudice, and like most prejudices, it's a pretty unintelligent position. Skywatcher have really done a terrific job in using this very modern material to develop an extraordinarily tough and robust mounting. The size of the bearing on the base here and how stable it is something that is really very impressive. But it's when we look at this control panel that we can see that this is, unlike the other mounts, this is a fully electronic mounting. I can move the telescope in altitude, and I can, whoops, if I do it up the locks, I can move it here in azimuth as well, east and west. Now, the really clever thing about the Virtuoso is not merely being able to move the telescope electronically, it's the fact that the telescope completely compensates for the rotation of the Earth. Now, this is a pretty important issue with a telescope. If you've ever used an instrument like this, an Altaz mounting, or even just a telescope on a stick or on a tripod, you'll know that the sky has got a certain kind of shape to it, so that when you're looking across at a target that's in the east and has just risen, you will have to move the telescope west and up a bit, west and up a bit, west and up a bit, until it culminates and reaches its high point due south, and then you're going to have to move the telescope west and down a bit, west and down a bit. Now, to be able to do this, as a human being, it's an easy thing for us to do. To get a machine to do it requires the instrument to actually know something about the shape of the night sky. Now, to do this trick of compensating for the rotation of the Earth, and one of the ways of thinking about this that might seem a little bit strange is that the telescope tube ends up standing still. The planet underneath the telescope is rotating, the mount is also rotating with the world, and the motors in the mount are compensating so that the telescope tube itself stands still. Now, obviously, the reason why we want the telescope to stand still is so that we can study the target in detail in the eyepiece. Obviously, if it's going to fly through the field of view because everything's moving, we're not going to be able to see it very well. So one of the absolutely standard features of a good telescope, especially a good telescope to start with, is something that's going to allow you to look at planets in detail by stabilizing and eliminating the rotation of the planet that we're actually standing on. So this is a pretty important detail. Now, the one bit of information that you actually need to know with the Virtuoso is the point in the sky immediately above the Earth's axis of rotation. We normally refer to this as the North Celestial Pole, or just the pole. Now, fortunately, there's a very bright star that we refer to as Polaris very near the North Celestial Pole. Now, in a previous video, I've actually gone into details about helping you to find that, and I'm not going to do that again now. So if you want to take a look at that clip, you can just follow the link on screen now and take a look at that video. Maybe look at it perhaps a little bit later on. Anyway, getting back to the Virtuoso again, we need to communicate to the telescope this very simple bit of information of where Polaris is in the night sky, so that it's got an understanding of the shape of the sky. To communicate that to the Virtuoso is beautifully simple. Simply find Polaris in the night sky using the technique that we suggested in the other video. Use the red dot to home in on it. Make sure you find Polaris in the main eyepiece of the telescope. Lock the axes here, the altitude and the azimuth, once you've actually found it in the eyepiece, and simply switch the instrument on. And that very simple action of switching the instrument on has now communicated to the telescope exactly where it is in the night sky, and all the moves now, that west a bit, west a bit, north a bit, west a bit, north a bit, west a bit, south a bit, all that's going to be taken care of for you completely automatically by the telescope, regardless of where you actually move the instrument. It's going to automatically compensate. So every time you find a target in the telescope, it will immediately begin tracking and make sure that that target stays stationary in the eyepiece. Just below the control panel here, we've got input ports. One is for the cruise control, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. The middle one here is for external power, so that's quite useful. You can actually plug a 12 volt, either a battery system or even a mains unit. Don't forget, if you're going to use a mains unit, make sure you've got a residual current breaker to make sure that if the power supply gets dewed up, everyone is safe from the possibility of electric shocks and that kind of thing. And the port over here is another upgrade port, enabling you to plug in the go-to system. More on that later. Another great trick that the Virtuoso's got up its sleeve, and it's actually got quite a few, is the dual encoder system. Now, this is a very clever idea, and you don't normally encounter it on What is, after all, an entry-level telescope? If you look at the 90mm Virtuoso, this normally sells in Britain for around 200 UK pounds. That puts it firmly in the sector of an entry-level scope. And you don't normally find anything like this idea of the dual encoder system. Now, very briefly sketched, what the dual encoder actually gives you is that although the telescope now knows, with that initial startup system, about the shape of the sky and exactly how it needs to energize the motors to precisely track something in the night sky, even though it appears from the point of view of the telescope to be moving on a fairly graceful curve, the telescope will track it beautifully by combining these two motors. If at some point, so let's say we're observing Jupiter, and if at some point during that observing session we feel like just having a look at something that's over there shining on the horizon, I can undo the manual locks, move the telescope to that target, perhaps observe it for a few moments, and then the telescope will just carry on tracking. It won't have lost that position and that initial shape of the sky that we've actually told it. Now, with most entry-level telescopes, you've completely lost your position. There is no way the telescope would be able to remember that you've made these simple, unauthorized manual moves. And that really is a great trick on the Virtuoso. And of course, it really comes into its own when you use this telescope with a go-to upgraded handset. More on that later. We're looking at the what would normally be on a handset, but it's actually built onto the mount here, keeping things very, very simple for you. We've got a very simple on and off switch at the top here to get it going. And I don't know whether you can see this, but when I lined up the indexing on Polaris there, I don't know whether you can see it, but the keys are actually flashing. They're actually giving a little double flash. It's quite gentle in a soft red light to actually show that the telescope is tracking. We can disengage the tracking at any point simply by pressing buttons 1 and 2 there simultaneously. And we can also switch the tracking back on by, again, pressing those 2 keys simultaneously. So we haven't got to use the instrument only in astronomical tracking mode. We can use it if you've got a nice view of shipping or something else. You could use this as a terrestrial instrument without the tracking at all, and just using the electronic system to move the instrument around without it gradually moving off target. So that's quite a useful feature in its own right. The buttons are numbered that you can see on here, and some of them have double functions when we come to some of those other things that the instrument can actually do. But one of the simple ones to work with here, we've got simple numbers on them. We can see here 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now, by simply dabbing those buttons, I can change the moving speed, so the speed of the motors. So by switching it to 5, for example, I've got the fastest slewing speeds. I haven't got everything tightened up here, which is very naughty. But don't forget, we won't have lost position. So that's position 5. There's 4. And you can see it's a lot more sedate. Don't be surprised, these speeds really do need to go down quite quickly, because this movement that you're seeing here at 4 is massive. This is actually moving the telescope very, very quickly. In fact, you appreciate we're moving whole degrees here in just a few seconds. So we can slow it down at 3. You're going to struggle now. I can hear it, you probably can't. All the way down to sidereal rate tracking. Now, sidereal rate is a small multiple on top of sidereal rate, in fact, is a great speed if you're going to be using this with a camera of some kind. So if you're using this with a webcam to take images of planets, these low speeds are a great way of keeping the target on these very small chips these cameras have got. And that's great that you can do that kind of stuff with this telescope. It's equipped to enable you to do this kind of high precision imaging that requires very, very fine movements of the telescope. And this is a good point to point out as well, the stability of this mounting. That's an important feature when you're doing photography, planetary photography, and it really is very solid and very stable. While we're looking at the drive base here, there's just a couple of other things I want to show you. Built into the instrument base here, we've got a spirit level. The tracking of the instrument will actually be more accurate if you start off with the base being fairly level, and to that end it's actually got these rather nice leveling legs on 2 of the positions, built in, and you can see we've got a lock knob at the top there, and then we've got a rotating, I don't know whether you can see that, but I'm rotating the knob to a new height. Once I've got it right relative to the spirit level over there, I just give that a spin and lock it down, and we've obviously got a unique level now on the base there. Another feature that again the engineering buff in me really likes are these big locks. A lot of the time, certainly with starter level telescopes, but even on much bigger and better telescopes as well, the locks are often quite fiddly and they're difficult to operate with gloves on when it's cold and that kind of thing. These are great, just the sheer size of them and the ease with which they can be operated. The design elements here in terms of the ergonomics really are excellent. I just think they've done such a great job, especially when we start out with this kind of idea that it's made of MDF board. You know, it doesn't sound like a great idea to start with, but when you see what they've done with it and how they've made it work, the whole ensemble really is a terrific result in something that is very stable. Now, you can hear I'm pretty keen on this telescope, so this might be a good time to slip in a negative word about it. Now, you can see we've got this perched on a little table here to show you, and that really is its Achilles heel, because obviously no matter how good the telescope mounting is, it's only going to be as good as the tabletop that you've mounted on. So if you've got one of these little kind of silly cocktail kind of tables outside on the veranda of the garden or whatever, it really isn't going to work too well on that kind of thing. You're going to need a fairly decent tabletop to put this on. There is no tripod fitting for this instrument. You might be able to cobble something up, I don't know. In fact, short of a tabletop, the best thing I've seen to put it on is a chair. You can actually position it on a chair fairly easily, or a stool, and providing you've got good ground to put it on. But that's worth bearing in mind. It does require a tabletop. Now, think this through just for a minute and you'll see what a problem this can potentially be. If you've got a large table, you know, the kind of thing that we see offered by the garden centres every summer in Britain, maybe to see up to 12 people or even 8 people, well, that's quite a decent sized table. Think about it for a minute. You're going to have to put this on one corner of the table. That's going to give you a chunk of the sky that kind of looks like this. To actually be looking over the back here, we're going to actually have to pick the telescope up and move it onto a new part of the table. So think that through just for a minute. You do, even though the instrument is ready to go as it stands, ready to put on a tabletop, you may have to think about where you're going to put the table and what you're going to use, or even come up with something that you use specifically for operating the telescope. There you go, something bad about it in the midst of everything that's so very good. You do need a decent table to operate it. I don't know whether you can hear it. I'm going to bring the mic up, but if I'm going to take the mic off and hold it up to it. Can you hear that little soft bleeping in the background there? It really is very, very faint, even at night, and I've operated one of these at night. It really is very faint and difficult to hear. You've got to be quite near the telescope to be able to hear it, and I like that. I don't like things that are noisy and are disturbing the peace and quiet at the eyepiece. The flashing lights as well that I was telling you about, you can actually switch that off. You can switch that little soft bleep off as well if you don't like it. It's there just reminding you of the mode that the telescope is in, that it's actually in the tracking mode. So it's a nice way of just very quietly communicating with the user, telling you what it's actually doing. Now let's just give you a quick run through of some of the other really interesting features of the Virtuoso, and to do this I'm going to take the telescope off just temporarily. I'm just going to put that over there. In the standard accessories that comes with the instrument is this L bracket, which we can fit in here, and straight away now we can start thinking about putting other instruments, providing they're not too heavy. This is actually made of plastic, so this is designed for relatively lightweight tasks. You can get a metal dovetail bar. It's not included in the kit, but you can get metal dovetail bars that can be fitted into here and will give you a wider range of weights and things that you can actually attach to it. We've also got an extra platform included in the kit that we're showing you here. We've got this extra platform that can be attached to the top of that bracket, so that we get 2 positions here for relatively lightweight cameras. Now the principle behind this is enabling you to put a camera on here and make a a cruising move with the mounting, so that the camera can be sitting on here. The telescope mount can be programmed with up to 6 preset movements very quickly. There doesn't have to be a very large gap between them, and it can make these movements. And using an additional cable, and you actually get a cable for Canon still cameras included with the Virtuoso mount, both the 90 and the 114. This enables you to plug your camera directly into the mounting, and the mounting will actually control the shutter release of your camera. So the idea here is you can do a time-lapse arrangement where the camera moves during the time-lapse. It lifts the quality of the time-lapse sequence into something a bit special if the camera actually moves during it. Now, if you use it with video cameras, you can get a video cruising movement with it. This is the idea of being able to pick a target, pick a location, obviously terrestrial or whatever you want to be looking at. You can pick a target position and a second target position, and the camera will move effortlessly and precisely between those two targets. You can ask our cameraman here just how hard that can actually be sometimes, moving the camera efficiently and smoothly from one target to another. With the Virtuoso, you can do that completely automatically. So what we've got here is an astronomical mount, but with these additional features as well that enable it to be used for still and video photography. Having got the 90 off the mount, this is a good kind of Radio 2 moment to bring in the 114 here and show you that. Obviously a more substantial looking instrument. This is a Newtonian reflector. Now, I'm not going to say too much about the 114 because we've actually given this treatment elsewhere on the channel, so if you want to find out more about the 114, go and take a look at it. We can see there we've got a 114mm mirror. It's a 500mm focal length. One big difference between the one that is actually supplied on the Virtuoso and the one I'm showing you here, the one from the Virtuoso is red. It's in the same colour red as the 90mm here, so that's just one little liberty we're taking. It's a decent fit for the mounting. We can actually get it. The dovetail bar, I think, is in a slightly different position to the one we're showing you here, and it will actually go vertical like that, like I'm showing it to you here. Quite a decent size instrument. The 114 is significantly different, obviously, with its 500mm focal length to the 90 here. Remember, the 90's got that 1250mm focal length. This is a more all-round telescope. This is going to give you some really quite nice views of galaxies and nebulae and that kind of thing. Rather better light gathering power, obviously, than the 90mm, plus the focal ratio of the instrument, that's the relationship between the aperture and the focal length, is a bit more conducive to giving you a broader range of target viewing. But don't forget, quite useless for terrestrial viewing. The 90mm there, you could in principle use it for high powered terrestrial viewing. Let's be clear about the kind of terrestrial viewing we're talking about though with the 90. Forget about birds on your bird table. Even though it will get them in focus, all you're going to see is their parasites or the beak. It's far too powerful to show you the whole bird in a convenient way that you could move around and follow its movements. For terrestrial viewing, we're really talking about very remote targets, ships on the horizon, that kind of thing. It really isn't suitable for general viewing. You need a much shorter focal length telescope for that. Although this is such a telescope, it's got a shorter focal length, the position of the eyepiece and the mirror arrangement makes it really quite unsuitable for terrestrial viewing. Okay, let's just show you the standard accessories that come with both of the Virtuosos, both the 90 and the 114. They both come with a 25mm eyepiece and a 10mm modified achromat eyepieces. Those are two good eyepieces to get you going. Look at the channel for our information about upgrading these eyepieces for something better. Both of the telescopes will benefit from improvements here, but these two eyepieces will certainly get you going. They both come with the 90-degree camera support with the additional tier that's included with both telescopes. They both also come with a red dot finder. The red dot finder for the 114 is slightly different to this. It's got a slightly different base on it, but in principle it's exactly the same as this one. They both come with the cable to allow you to connect a Canon digital SLR to the instrument. Lots of others available, so if you're a Nikon user, you can certainly get a cable for that, and there's one for most of the other big brands as well available on the market. But it actually comes with a Canon as standard. Nice little touch, I think. The 90 comes with a 90-degree diagonal. The 114 obviously doesn't need this, so it's not actually included. You've got a couple of other little bits and pieces, tools, and sometimes a little plastic compass, but that's essentially what you actually get with the telescope. We've talked about upgrading many times in these videos about the importance of having an instrument that allows you to grow and to go somewhere, rather than it being, you know, buy a new telescope every time you want to do something a little bit different. And I think the Virtuoso scores double points really for being an instrument that can be fully upgraded, even though we've got a relatively affordable, easy start to buy the basic instrument. Now, with both the 114 and the 90, they both use the now utterly industry standard 1.25" eyepiece fitting. So that leaves an entire world of accessories. You're not limited to Skywatcher. You can buy anybody's accessories and it will fit directly onto this instrument. That's a great feature. The dovetail bar here that enables the telescope to be fitted, that's another industry standard feature. Though invented by another company, this has now become quite standardized, and the dovetails used by all Skywatcher instruments would enable them to be fitted here. Now obviously there's a limit to the size of the instrument you can put on here, and in all seriousness the 114 is probably as large as you can go. You can see there are limitations to the kind of size of instrument you can put on here, but you could certainly put a bigger Mac than this 90 on here without any difficulty at all. And it's obviously great that you can put other instruments, spotting scopes and cameras using this same single, very easy to fit attachment. But absolutely the best upgrade that you can go with the Virtuoso turns it into a completely different telescope, and that's the addition of the AZ Go2 SynScan handset. That's this little gadget. I can simply plug this in to the instrument over here, and straight away we're now looking at a completely automated telescope. We've got over 30,000 targets, in fact rather more, very significantly more than a small aperture instrument like this can actually resolve and see, so that's worth bearing in mind. But the handset itself is absolutely terrific. This is a standard piece of equipment. You'll find this on some of Skywatcher's finest mountings, very serious mountings, and it's a great way of being able to find targets in the night sky in a completely automated fashion. It enables you to do a simple 2-star alignment. In fact, if you look at our video on the AZ Go2 instruments, there's a full presentation of using this handset, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it here. Cost of the handset can be quite high, but you can sometimes get hold of these second hand. But the important point is you've got an upgrade path to radically improve the instrument from its basic function. So there you have it, the complete package. That's the Skywatcher Virtuoso 90 and 114p auto tracking telescope system. That's it for this video. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you soon, I hope. Bye now.